Go live. That should make things better.
Indeed, shouldn't it? Well, it shouldn't really make any difference in actual fact, but
It shouldn't, but it's gonna.
since it was already supposedly. Okay, well, hello, folks. Hopefully, we are live and streaming. This is a behind the scenes thing. If you're seeing this message, it might be bad. This could be a janky connection. I don't know why it's like this. It should be better. But anyway, you've been warned that this is just the live feed. So if there are technical difficulties, that's what this version will have. There is a completed version that goes up later in the week that will at the very least, have cleaned up audio. That much I can guarantee. The video.
No audio lip sync, but we'll have cleaned up
The
audio.
video might be extremely slow. Are we that? Hold on. Let's count 1, 2, 3.
It was like a second.
1, 2, 3 together. Okay. Ready on 1, 2, 3, 4.
3.
It's not that bad on my end. Is it that bad on your end?
Okay. No, I mean I was counting with you. So
okay.
So you could see the delay. I mean, why would I delay myself?
It was like 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4 on my end. It's not that bad. Okay, well, right. I'm going to leave it there for now, and there'll be something later in the week. Okay, I don't know what, but something. All right.
All right. Let's see where we are audio-wise here. Almost 2 minutes. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Tom is back for the second week in a row, as promised last week. We made it. It's very good. And okay, so I don't want to start out on a bummer, but if we don't say it now, I won't say it later. So we don't usually comment on like any celebrity deaths and that, but I have to say, it really knocked the wind out of my sails. Grant Imahara passed away. He was from MythBusters, you know, the robot guy.
Oh, right. He passed away. That didn't even make it to my Facebook feed or my Twitter.
Yeah, he was only 49. So way too young. And if you happen to be hearing the news from us, it was a sudden, no one saw it come, a brain aneurysm out of nowhere that took his life, and that one really kind of punched me in the gut, seeing that news very late last night. So yeah, apologies, but I mean, someone who definitely...
Yeah, I'm going to be 49 this year,
right?
In a couple of months.
Yeah, had an impact on... I mean, worked on like and everything like that. So you know, it is movie related, and yeah, wasn't expecting that news to be part of things, but. My goodness, condolences to his family and friends, and yeah, wow, man, 2020, what a year. Not great. I also have a terrible red connection over here going on, so hopefully it'll be okay. Tom, if you hear anything I'm saying, you can jump back. I don't know why our connection is like this. It should be better. Hopefully it'll stabilize. Yeah.
Just waiting for you to finish talking, because I don't want to talk over the top of you anymore, because I've been talking over the top of you because we're both trying to talk at the same time. All right, let's just get the podcast started.
Yeah.
This is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. That is the primary and only guaranteed way to get your question onto the podcast. You can also reach out directly by leaving a comment at avrant.com. Go to facebook.com/AVRant Podcast, where we will sometimes respond to you and sometimes not. And sometimes those questions will end up on the podcast and sometimes not. We have youtube.com/AVRant, where you can not comment because YouTube, if you've ever been there, it's the worst. But we put our stuff up anyways because we're recording it, so why not?
Comments disabled.
That's right. You can contact Rob directly at rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. Now, we want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, all you have to do is support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. That sends you to a PayPal donation site, which you can use your credit card or your PayPal account to transfer money from you to us with a small processing fee taken by PayPal. So we want to thank our 2 people who did that this week. That was Jeremy and Joe. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much,
Yes,
Joe.
indeed. Thank you, Jeremy, Joe. Really appreciate the PayPal donations. Thank you so much.
I also want to thank our 124 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon is a service where it's like a continuing subscription, as an ongoing supporter of the podcast. You support your creative people, the people that you want to support through their creative endeavors. We can be one of them at patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. So we want to thank our 124 patrons. It's up from 121 last week. So thank you very much, everybody over at Patreon.
Yeah, super nice to see the number growing. Patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. If you'd like to sign up, you can think of it as a voluntary subscription if you like. It's an automatic monthly donation, and huge thanks to our 124 patrons.
Thank you. So if you can't support us financially, especially in these times, I completely understand. So please, if you do something that supports us in any way, just let us know, and we will mention you on the podcast. So Ken talked his uncle into getting an SVS SB1000 instead of a DefTech SuperCube 2000. The SuperCube uses a 7.5-inch woofer. They placed the order together, and Ken made sure to tell SVS it was because of us. So thank you very much, Ken.
Yes, Ken, thank you very much. And your uncle should thank you. That is a recommendation with which we would agree. So that's very nice.
We would. We also have some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during the COVID pandemic. Those come from Efren, Michael, and Martin. So thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, it was very nice to hear from Efren. We've chatted with him multiple times. Hadn't heard from him in a little while, so very nice to see a very pleasant message come in from him. Mike, thank you very much for the messages that you sent as well. Thank you to everyone from us for keeping the podcast going by continuing to listen and sending in your questions. It's very much appreciated over here. Yeah. Filling some air because Tom is waiting to hear that I'm back. I think he can hear it. Okay, there we go.
When I went to Puerto Rico, so it was very nice. I don't know if you said that or not, but yeah, talking over the top of each other again. This is just going to be the best episode. Yeah. I'm sorry to all of our listeners. You can blame the interwebs. This is and this is something I did want to talk about. So my kids are not going back to school in person. I don't care what our stupid governor says, or anybody else in our government who thinks that, when we have as many cases as we have going on in Florida, that I'm going to send my kids back into the school that is the public school system. So they will be staying home, which means during the times that I like to do this podcast, which is nice for me. They will all be home and probably doing, streaming and everything else. So we will not be able to do this during the day. We will have to transfer back to nights.
Okay.
I think once the school year starts up, which will be in a couple of weeks.
That's right. You guys start super early. Still. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. We start super early so that they can finish the semester before the Christmas break, which is fine. I kind of like that, but whatever. So again, my house is still up in the air. We have a floor plan settled on for the kitchen. We are now getting prices for the cabinetry, and then once that gets ordered and everything's settled, I will know a timeline for when I will have to move out again, which will probably be during the school year. So I just don't know. I don't know. All right, let's look at some news here. Logitech is killing the Harmony Express remote. This was the model with very few physical buttons that mostly relied on Amazon's voice assistant to control everything. That sounds like a terrible idea. I'm glad they're killing it. But it's not just a matter of no longer being able to buy it. In September, when they end support, all existing Harmony Express remotes will stop working. As a make good, you can request either a full refund of the purchase price or to have your Harmony Express replaced with the Harmony Elite. That's kind of a deal, since the MSRP of the Express was $250 and the MSRP of the Elite is $350. So buy one, leave it in the box, wait till the date, and then switch it. I mean, I can't believe that nobody over at Harmony didn't say, or Logitech didn't say, hey, you realize that they're just gonna be able to buy it and then save $100, and then I can't believe that no one said that. So they must know that people can do this. So that makes me kind of morally okay with telling you to do it.
Well, I mean, when this news just came out, I actually tweeted out, I'm like, at the moment that the news came out, I don't know if it's the case by the time you hear this, but like Amazon still had some Expresses that they were selling for $150. So it was even more of a deal that
Jeez.
you just snap up one for $150 and then trade it in immediately for they were selling the Elites for $300 instead of $350, but still quite a savings if you grabbed an Express for $150. So yeah, I mean, obviously it won't be around very much longer. They had very, very low stock of the Expresses. They haven't been manufacturing them for a while. So it's not like a ton of people can play the system that way. But anyway, if you happen to be someone who had an Express and you haven't heard this news yet, certainly get your refund or trade in, because it's not just a matter of, it's not going to get updates. It will be bricked because it had to be connected to the internet to work, and they are shutting that server down.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how. I imagine that still works the same way that Logitech setup stuff works, though, right? They have their program, and you tell it, what devices you have and what activities you want and all those other things. So it should be a fairly easy matter of just going into that program and saying, I no longer have this remote, I have the Elite now, and then Bob's your uncle. It should work
there is a
fairly
transition
simply.
thing, but of course the Elite has way more buttons to be programmed, so there will be some change there. But regardless, a functioning remote certainly beats a completely non-functioning one. So yeah. Uh-oh. I wasn't sure if you were talking or not. I did. God.
I think you stopped talking, so I'm going to start talking. Here we go.
Apologies.
As expected, shortly following Denon's 2020 AV receiver lineup announcement, now Marantz's 2020 receivers have been announced. AV Rant listener DJ and Carl both wrote in to say they're interested in hearing our take on the Denon versus Marantz, whether it's sort of a /Lincoln or /Lincoln, really? Or Toyo/Lexus, or if there's actually no discernible difference at all. Just like their Denon counterparts, each Marantz model gets a single HDMI 2.1 input that's limited to 40 gigabits per second. They have identical convenience upgrades of 2 memory slots for Odyssey configurations, a dedicated pre-out mode, and Bluetooth in and out. So here we go. Here's some of the new ones. Marantz SR 5015. So $1,100 versus the Denon 2700H. It's $850. Both top out at that's a big difference in price. Both top out at 7 speakers and have obviously multi-EQ XT. Neither supports IMAX Enhancer or 3D. This Marantz claims a tiny bit more power, 100 watts versus 95 watts per channel, and it has a full set of 7.2 pre-outs, which it doesn't have. It doesn't get the new dedicated pre-out mode though, so doesn't sound like you're getting good value for your $250.
Yeah, an extra $250 gets you a set of pre-outs. That is the only really discernible difference between the Marantz 5015 and the new Denon X2700H.
The Marantz SR 6015, that's $1,600 versus the Denon 3700H. It's $1,200, so it's a $400 difference here. Both get 9 amps built in, but 11 speaker processing with 11.2 pre-outs and Odyssey Multi-EQ XT32, so the upgraded one. Both get IMAX Enhanced, which you don't want to use, but not or 3D. Once again, the Marantz claims a tiny bit more power, 110 watts per channel versus 105 watts per channel. One rounded up, one rounded down. What happened there? And this Marantz model gets a 7.1 analog inputs, which the Denon doesn't have, but the Denon gets a full front panel display. The Marantz only has the low port hole. So, again, for $400, you get fake more power and analog inputs.
Analog inputs. That's really the discernible difference between the Marantz 6015 and X3700.
We loved you so, but then you sucked.
At the same time, though, the actual street price is very often not the MSRP. So the actual difference in price you would pay is not necessarily as much as what's being listed here.
Right. So the Marantz SR 7015 is $2,300 versus the Denon X4700H, $1,700. So $500 difference. Both add Aura 3D. Woohoo! Did I say?
5. It's $600 difference.
Sorry, my math. I don't math well. And other than cosmetics, the Marantz having 7.1 analog input and extra component video input, their specs are identical. A component video, that's worth $600. Right
I mean, hey, the previous price difference was $400. Now the price difference is $600, but they did give you an additional component video input. What everyone has been clamoring for the past 20 years.
Never. Marantz SR 8015s, $3,200 versus the Denon X6700H, $2,500. So there's $700.
$700 difference for the flagships.
Both move up to 11 amps built-in and 13 speaker processing for your choice of 7.2.6 or 9.2.4 configuration. Both will supposedly get DTS X Pro via firmware update. Don't hold your breath, I guess.
Well, it's DTS, power specs so,
right. Well, yeah, maybe it's not so much. Who's the group that owns them these days? It's not. It's
like Razer. Razer owns. No, that's THX. Razer owns THX, not DTS.
No. I'm talking about Denon and Marantz.
Oh, Sound United.
It's Sound United, right? Sound United. So don't blame Sound United if they don't get the updates.
No, it's all the DTS side if there's a delay, and there will be.
So power specs are identical, but the Marantz gets a toroidal transformer. I said it right. And the Denon's, instead of the Denon's EI, that's an I, right?
It is. It's an EI, yes.
Okay. EI transformer, and the Marantz gets 7.1 analog inputs and 1 extra component video input. I could care less about that transformer. I'm sure it's technically better on some level, or at least
yes, objectively, as a linear power supply, the toroidal power supply, I mean, assuming it's similar to how it was with the previous models when it was flagship versus flagship, is a little bit lower noise. Of all the things, I mean, we were asked there by a couple of listeners if there's any, discernible differences. Well, objectively, you can measure a difference in noise from the change in power supply. That might be the only one. I mean, obviously, if you actually have a genuine need of a 7.1 analog input, well, that makes the decision for you, doesn't it? None of the Denons have a 7.1 analog input. Right. I don't know how many people are still using that, but there could be an objective reason why you would need it. But no, in this instance, in previous years, Denon and Marantz almost had like a TikTok type of thing with the way the models went. Where they sort of shared a same base platform, but the Marantz model always got like some little extra feature. It was kind of a little TikTok up the lineup. But this year, they're virtual parity, except for that 7.1 analog input, really. So I'll be going Denon all year long this year, assuming that the actual street price is lower on the Denons, which it typically is. Yeah,
and that's fine. I mean, what that does for most of you who are listening to saying, what? Which is also us, by the way. But what they're doing is they make that more attractive to the custom installers, the professional, the people who have got the people who are asking for a home theater to be built around, whatever gear they have or want. And a lot of times there's going to be vinyl or older stuff. Oh, I still want to be able to play my VHSs. And not knowing that the minute they put it on their 150-inch screen, they're going to go, oh, the pixels. So many. So big. I keep talking as if Rob doesn't exist. Gregory, having now heard the advice of 2 AVRant listeners to just build separated framing instead of messing with sound clips and hat channels, Gregory opted to use offset 2x3s instead of a single 2x6 frame. Since this new wall was going underneath a support beam, it was going to end up 6 inches wide anyway, so he gave up nothing on floor space, but now he has separate studs for the drywall inside of the theater versus outside the theater. Can he claim he has a room within a room? No. You can't. But it's kind of like that. Is this a fisheye lens, or is that wall like super bent?
It is a fisheye lens on the second image there to allow us to see a little bit more width. And it looks as though there is another party wall that he has constructed that. Oh no, maybe it does. Does it have this construction? The staggered studs on that back wall. It's a little bit tough to tell in this image, but this isn't quite an entire room within a room. An entire room within a room would also include a floating floor and a floating ceiling. So we haven't quite reached that, but no, I like this idea. I am in full agreement with the advice that we have seen from a couple of listeners now, where they're like, yeah, you know what? Even if it costs you, the 2 or 3 inches, just put up the extra framing. It's so much faster and easier than dealing with all the sound clips and hat channels. So good on you. And in this case, didn't even cost him any extra space. It was going to be 6 inches wide anyway.
Right. So, I mean, that's one of the things that we're going through right now is this cost versus performance issue with our kitchen as we're, looking at stuff and, trying to decide, I've never looked at a floor tile in my life. My
Mm-hmm.
whole life, I have never shopped for a floor, and now I'm shopping for floors because my wife said if they're going to tear down the ceiling, the cabinets, the countertops, why are we stuck with this floor that we hate? I'm like, okay. Apparently, we've got money. I didn't realize that we did. I
Yeah.
don't know how we're going to pay for any of this stuff, but and no one's given us a dollar amount yet. We know how much the insurance company is going to spend on our kitchen. We know that on the cabinetry and the countertops, but we don't know how much anything that we've picked is going to cost. So we're doing the same thing. Like we'll pick something and we'll talk about something in the general contractor that came from the insurance company. Though I'm like, okay, that wasn't a good idea. Well, if you get that style of cabinet, then you can double how much all this is going to cost. I'm like, okay, so what kind of cabinets can I afford? Let's just go there. So it's very stressful. I hate it. But anyways. All right, let's get to the questions here. Infinite Gary. Gary has his multiple different rooms with different speaker setups and a whole bunch of different subwoofers, and he's moved around and tried it in different combinations. How would he know if what he is hearing in any given room with any given combination of gear is the correct presentation? The same movie or music can sound different from room to room or setup to setup. There's no question about that. And he doesn't necessarily go through a full room correction calibration every time. When he just wants to try a quick comparison, would doing so ensure a correct presentation in any given room, or is there more to it? Go through it. Yes, you should. If you're going to compare, you have to do a room correction and calibration of some sort.
Start talking when I heard you stop, but in any case, it is on my end. It's not on your end. It's OBS that's doing the issues. So fun times. But anyway, I'll try to truck on here while Tom is just a Skype logo. Whoa. Okay. I don't know if that sound is even coming through on my end. This is one of the worst connections that I've ever had here. Okay, you know what? I'm going to hang up my Skype call on Tom and try to call him back in just a second here. Yeah, while I do that, I'll go on to say that getting what we would call like a correct presentation is not necessarily difficult, but it can be tedious. Let's see if anything is coming back of Tom here.
Yep. I'm
okay.
here.
Yeah, you're back on my end too. So very much apologize for that, folks. Very janky technical, and it's all on my end. So I do apologize.
I think next week we try Zoom. I think next week we just try Zoom.
It's OBS that's giving me the issues. It's not even Skype.
Is it really?
So okay. I'll have to see if there's an update or something I can do to that. But anyway, yes, going on with answering Gary's question there. What you're really looking for is, if you want to be assured that you're hearing a quote-unquote correct presentation, then what you need to be able to do is play a sweep through each speaker individually and have that sound linear at least your listening position. I mean, we know that Gary really only cares about one listening spot in his case. So at least he's not having to listen in all three positions. If you get linear response in just your primary listening spot for Gary, that's good enough. But that's really the way that you would be assured that you're hearing as close to like for like. There are still differences that can happen in the timing. The timing isn't necessarily going to be the same. The transient response or the reverberation and decay time from room to room is still going to be different. But at least if the frequency response sounds linear from each individual speaker, as well as crossing over into your subwoofer and remaining sounding linear, then that is a quote-unquote correct presentation, as correct as you can get for that room and what the timing of the reverberation and decay will allow in that given room. Yeah. That's about it. But yeah, it would be the tedium of listening to a sweep from each speaker individually.
Yeah, I think that in many ways we take the joy out of audio.
Yep.
For many people. Because I think that there's, like, within the audiophile community, there's a great amount of joy to be taken by listening to different gear and experiencing the same material in different ways. And somehow, by it's sort of like cooking, by adding different things, you can kind of change how the entire dish comes out. I believe that audiophiles take a great amount of pleasure in experiencing their system and then going to another person's house and experiencing their system and having it be a completely different thing. And, and then deciding whether or not they want theirs to sound more like that person's or whatever. And we just poop all over that, and we're like, nope, we're going for linear. We want it to sound exactly the way it's supposed to sound and nothing else. So therefore, if I go into Rob's home theater, I expect it to sound very similar to my theater. I mean, there may be some differences.
There will
in the
be.
performance.
It's smaller. It's a smaller room. It is different speakers. That it's not going to be exactly the same, but it's probably going to be more similar than different. And you know what? As I've mentioned before, particularly with Gary, I have no problem with someone who says, "I want to be able to plug this in, not spend a tremendous amount of time and tedium on setup, and just hear what it sounds like basically out of the box and plugged in and play. I just want to hear those differences, the default setting, how do these things differ, and go with the one that I prefer straight out of the box." I'm like, I don't really have a problem with that. You're totally allowed to do that as a consumer. But if you're doing what Gary's doing, which is moving things around and trying to compare them and being concerned about, is this set up optimally? Well, then you got to go through the tedium. That's the only way I know how.
Right. All right, Tate. Do we have any insight regarding which streaming services do the best job of widely supporting 4K Atmos or at least 5.1 audio? Netflix seems to be pretty reliable on those fronts across almost all devices, and Disney Plus seems pretty reliable too. He's pleasantly surprised to find that that CBS All Access seems to do a pretty good job as well. I wouldn't know. I'm not paying for it. But other services seem to be hit or miss. Hulu has some content in 4K and 5.1, but then certain shows you would expect to be in those formats aren't. YouTube TV seems to be only in 1080p, and they don't say anywhere that if they support 5.1 audio or not. I think they used to, and they don't anymore. HBO Max says it has 4K HDR and Atmos. They are coming, but they don't have it right now. What about NBC's Peacock? Any info there? Basically, why is it so over the place, and how can you find out which streaming services support which formats on which pieces of hardware? And he's really right, Tate, that there is lots of variance even within the platforms.
Yes.
I was watching, I want to say Hulu last night, and it was a documentary about Scientology, which is relevant to me because the mecca of Scientology is downtown Clearwater, where my wife grew up in Clearwater, basically. And we were just driving through there recently, and they have turned it into like the world's most sterile, boring, awful place. Like this really cute little downtown area that used to be, kind of a meeting place. It's now it feels like a hive mind of Scientology down there, which if you're a Scientologist would be great, but we're not, so it sucks. So I found it, I started listening to it, I'm like, man, it's like stereo, but with it's almost like they took the 5.1 mix and they just cut out the surrounds and the center channel so that the dialogue is just in the left and right, but they didn't matrix the center channel back out, so you get like really low volume for the dialogue compared to everything else. So I kept turning it up, trying to hear it better, but then the music and the background noises, everything would be way too loud. It was very, very it was not a very good experience. But then again, other Hulu stuff sounds great. So yeah.
Yeah, so that wasn't even a change of hardware or a change of streaming service. That's just one particular piece of content within that. So there used to be the Simple Tech guru, Barb Gonzalez, who used to do a wonderful job of tracking this exact sort of thing. But I haven't seen her site or her videos or anything updated since 2018 now. So I don't think she's doing it anymore, which is unfortunate. Over at CNET, David Katzenmeier is doing a very good job of tracking the what would you call it? Cable alternatives, like YouTube TV or like Hulu Plus Live TV, that type of thing. But he's not putting up any sort of comparison of just the regular streaming services, regular Netflix and Disney Plus and that. He's focusing particularly on the television alternative streaming services. So yeah, I don't personally know a really good resource to just point you to for someone who's really doing a excellent job of tracking this. I also wish somebody would. That would be helpful to just have one place to go, but I'm not aware of it. If anyone does know, please let us know. Question@avrant.com. Send it in to us and let us know so we can pass it on.
I would not be surprised if Netflix had the best support for all of this stuff, simply because they've been around the longest. And I so rarely have issues with Netflix sounding weird. most of the time it's fine. There's like one or two episodes of one or two
Sure.
shows that I've come across that have been bad. Hulu seems to be doing a much better job, and Disney Plus, I mean, how can they not be doing a good job when they have so little content? I mean, there's just not that much stuff up there. So for them to be doing a poor job of it would be silly.
Right.
So maybe percentage-wise, Disney Plus is doing the best because of how very shallow their library is. But I would say that if you just look at raw numbers, I would think that Netflix followed closely by Hulu would be the two that would be doing the best.
Right. I mean, we definitely know that like Netflix and Disney Plus's platforms for certain support 4K and HDR and Atmos audio. No question about that. It's not on every piece of content, but as formats go, they for sure support those. And that, I mean, Netflix is on every type of streamer that you can possibly imagine, and Disney Plus is doing a pretty good job of catching up as far as that goes. So those ones are pretty easy to look at. But like, yeah, HBO Max, I mean, at least they have publicly said, yes, they are going to be adding HDR and Atmos to their streaming. They just didn't have it at launch, but they've publicly said it now. NBC's Peacock, which as we're recording this, will be launching tomorrow. So if you're hearing this on the Friday release, it's already come out. But the news has come out that they, at launch, will not have any 4K, will not have any HDR, will not have any Atmos. In fact, they won't even have profiles. They won't have the ability to download any episodes on day one when that comes out. So there's a lot of features that have been missing, but they haven't publicly said that, yeah, for sure 4K, HDR, and Atmos are coming soon or even at all. It's assumed that they will be at some point because it's just kind of the table stakes that every other streaming service is going for now. But, no guarantees of it exactly because they haven't committed to it. And then getting into the issue of hardware to hardware, because there are differences where, the service we know is capable of providing this to certain pieces of hardware, but not every piece of hardware. I mean, that is they
have to update all their apps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where people want to say, how come they can't just do 4K? How come they can't just do 4K? Whenever you say the word just, you're almost always either wrong, talking out of your butt, or both. Because it is just is almost never the case. So, when I'm talking in the kitchen, why can't I just have, this? And they're like, yeah, you don't understand what you're asking for. I'm like, you are absolutely right. I do not.
And then,
so, I mean, the number of apps they have to update in order to get 4K HDR Atmos on your particular streaming platform of choice. I mean, just think about the hardware differences, the workarounds they have to do. I mean, the amount of programming hours it takes to get all this stuff done per device. And you're looking at like 4 or 5 different Rokus, 3 versions of the Xbox that are out there, or even more, I think. It's just insane. And then plus all the TV apps that are available for each manufacturer.
And different versions from year to year, which the television manufacturers have not done a good job of updating previous years to the current year's platform of their built-in streaming OS. So, yeah, there's a tremendous...
It's mind-boggling how many apps probably they have to deal with. They're like, what gives us the most coverage?
Pretty much.
And it's not Roku.
Well,
but it might be now that TCL has them in there. But wow, just I would be hitting Xbox, I would be hitting PlayStations, I would be hitting the built-in apps on the newest Samsungs and Sony TVs, and
That's the Android TV platform, which at least hits a few separate devices. But yeah, I mean, like, Roku should be, statistically, they still are the most purchased external piece of hardware that is dedicated to streaming. It is still Roku, but Roku has this whole licensing thing where they actually charge the content providers to put their content onto a Roku. Which is why Peacock and HBO Max are not on Roku devices yet. They haven't finalized that agreement. It's not like they don't want to be, but they haven't finalized the licensing agreement yet. So, I mean, Tate didn't even ask about something like automatic frame rate switching or automatic switching between HDR and SDR, which isn't always even a given on every piece of hardware. So, I mean, that is the reason why, by and large, I have continued to recommend the Apple TV 4K as the most likely hardware candidate to get the highest end features from all the streaming platforms, because so far that has been the case, but it isn't for everything. The big notable exceptions are there's no official Kodi app on the Apple TV 4K. So if you're huge into Kodi, it's not officially there. There are ways of side loading it, but it's harder on an Apple device. They aren't the best Plex player, and they certainly aren't the best YouTube player. So those are three major things that you might want that the Apple TV 4K is definitely not the best at. But for the majority of the actual streaming services, they do tend to get the best that is available. So to me, that's still the safest choice that's out there. But then supposedly there's a new updated Apple TV 4K hardware that should be launching in the not too distant future. And who knows how well the existing one right now will continue to be supported. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, Tate, but it is unfortunately the reality.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so complex, and they need to simplify it. I just can't for the life of me figure out how they could. You know
Unless there's some consolidation or trimming of the number of hardware platforms that are out there. I mean, maybe if a codec thing, because they have to have things in multiple different codecs still to support multiple different hardware. So maybe if everybody gets on board with AV1, that'll actually help in a way, because at least they won't have to have all these different codec versions. But then if they're still supporting legacy devices for any amount of time, they will still have to have other codecs. So there's that to consider too. We mentioned last week that we were going to briefly touch upon Hamilton coming out on Disney Plus. We never got to it because we were saving it for this question, which we're getting to this week. But I just wanted to mention how when Disney Plus first launched, the only piece of hardware on day one that supported Atmos was the Apple TV 4K. But I was noticing that I was watching things on Disney Plus on my Apple TV 4K in Canada, and I wasn't getting Atmos from anything. It was sending out, Dolby Digital Plus, which was being decoded by the Apple TV 4K. That's how it handles it. And yet when Hamilton came out, it was in Atmos from Disney Plus through my Apple TV 4K. So clearly it was on the transmission side. And there were actually some articles about how they are still reducing the amount of bandwidth they're sending because of everybody being stuck at home and using their internet services a lot more. So that is still ongoing, at least in Canada, where I am in BC. So yeah, I forget what it was you wanted to mention about Hamilton. You said something last week.
Oh, I did the same thing. I as the show was going on, I had to stand up on the couch so I could put my ear close to the Atmos speaker, overhead to see if it was playing for sure. I mean, it was a pretty good. I mean, one of the things when you're in a theater, and for those who've never been to musical theater or in theater before, the seats are all stadium seating, right? So they go up as they go back. So when you hear the audience clapping, it's coming from behind you and above you.
Yeah.
That's the case. And so when the clapping started at the very beginning, I'm like, oh, this is definitely Atmos. It's like the first time I sat down and went, yep, Atmos is happening, and I'm experiencing it. And this is definitely happening
Surround
right
backs,
now.
Tom. Surround backs made all the difference.
Backs made all the difference, Rob. I can't believe I haven't been recommending it more strongly, because clearly, when you want to hear people clapping from behind you and above you, surround backs are absolutely imperative
vital
for Hamilton. Vital speakers. So yes, it went pretty. It was a very, very good. We watched it. The thing is it's very long. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes, and my wife made it through about 2/3 of it before she had to go to bed because she had to work next day, and so she's like, "Oh, we need to watch the second half again." I'm like, but she doesn't want to sit there for another hour and 20 minutes or hour.
Well, the good news is, being on Disney Plus, it's not like you bought Broadway tickets at hundreds of dollars per seat. Yeah. You absolutely can watch it at a later time in little snippets if you choose.
Yes. RD is looking for a 27-inch TV for his workshop. Space is tight, so it needs to have a very thin bezel, and it needs to be bright and able to connect to an Apple TV 4K. I think that's every 27-inch TV these days. Shouldn't be a problem there. He'll be using Sonos speakers connected via AirPlay, so he's not worried about built-in speakers. And gaming is not a concern. The max budget is about $400. Any suggestions? Nope.
So, I mean, 27-inch televisions these days are actually kind of a rarity. I did end up going over to a computer monitor for this. Now, one thing is, so I mean, obviously at this price point, at this size, actual 4K pixels is really not much of a concern. You don't actually need 8 million pixels on a 27-inch diagonal display. And
you wear them like glasses.
and
Just like right here.
And HDR performance is not going to be the pinnacle of performance at a $400 27-inch monitor. But what was important to me was finding something that had compatibility with those signals at the very least, because that was something he mentioned that he wanted. He was saying he was looking at sort of like the least expensive 4K displays that he could find. But there is something kind of important, which is that not every display that is even 4K resolution necessarily had HDMI 2.0 inputs with HDCP 2.2. The copy protection side of it, which he needs those things for an Apple TV 4K. He's not connecting this to a PC. He's connecting it to a regular streaming device that's expecting a television. So to me, compatibility was the important thing. So I did find Dell's S27 as the size, 19DM. It is under their ultra slim or ultra thin series, so it does have exceedingly trim bezels and even a very slim little stand that's going to stand on, so it takes up very little space. But importantly, two full bandwidth HDMI 2.0 inputs with HDCP 2.2. And those are, in fact, the only inputs on this. So this really is more similar to a television than a computer monitor, if I'm being honest. Now, it's 1440p resolution. It's not 2160p resolution, but like I say, I'm not worried about the pixel count, and it for sure does accept a full 4K resolution signal as an input, and it's even Display HDR 400 certified, which, as I've been mentioning, if you're looking at the Display HDR specifications, you really want Display HDR 600 or above to actually get the HDR performance, but in terms of compatibility, 400 is enough, and that's what this has, all for $385 right now. So yeah, can't do better than that, I don't think.
Sounds good. Freddie has a Marantz SR7D10 receiver and the monolith monoprice 5-channel amp. They work perfectly fine together, but when he turned on his PC, he got an obvious ground loop hum. And if you've ever heard of ground loop hum, you would know obvious was, well, implied. Because it's very, it's already there.
You can't miss it. And
nobody says, I think I have a ground loop. They're like, oh my God, something's wrong. What is it? And we say, it's a ground loop.
Yeah. And if you know what it sounds like, then yes, it becomes very easy to identify exactly what it is you're hearing. It is a 60 hertz hum, by the way. That is what a ground loop would be, at least in North America, where our power
I was going to say, in Europe, it's going to be 50
in Europe,
hertz.
it's going to be 50
there you
hertz,
go.
Yeah.
He got an inexpensive install gear ground loop isolator amp noise filter, which just has stereo RCA imp connections. It wasn't clear from his email whether he plugged it in between his PC and the Marantz or between his Marantz and this monolith amp, but regardless, he says it worked and fixed the ground loop hum. I'm almost certain he put it between his Marantz and his monolith.
Well,
his PC would have been connected via HDMI or something, right?
Well, no, well, that's why I was a little bit, like he was saying, with his other sources, the Marantz and the monolith work fine. It's when he turns on his PC. So by deduction, it must have been that he's using just an analog stereo connection between his PC and the Marantz, and putting in this little ground loop isolator prevented the ground loop from happening. Yeah, so I think that must be where the connection is being made.
Yeah, we'll see. But now he wants to know if a power conditioner would make a difference and further improve his power. More power. The service coming into his house is a 200 amp panel, if that matters. I don't think it does. If more than likely, what's happening here is you have your computer plugged into a different outlet than all the rest of the stuff. So you could have skipped the ground loop isolator and just plugged your computer into wherever everything else is plugged into, and it should have fixed the problem right there. That should have done it. If not, then you have a bigger problem. It's not it shouldn't be a ground loop at that point. But since you have plugged this in somehow and it has worked, then and you've already bought it, I guess you could stick with what you've got. I don't see any reason why a power conditioner. I mean, if you don't have a surge protection system on all your
Sure.
gear, then you need to. But I don't think it would improve or make a further
No, I mean,
difference. If the ground loop is gone, then it's gone. I mean, it can't be more
right.
gone.
Yeah, I mean, filtering radio frequency interference, filtering electromagnetic interference, stabilizing voltage, none of those things are going to make any difference if the problem was a ground loop, because a ground loop is
Right.
none of those things. It is its own specific problem, and you've already solved your particular one. The reason I kept the mention of the 200 amp panel in there is because I suspect at some point his house was renovated or added onto, because normally it's a 100 amp panel. That's what most regular residential houses have. If you have a 200 amp panel, you probably had that panel upgraded at some point, or the previous owners did. And I'm suspecting that if there was an addition made and the panel was upgraded when that add-on was done to your house, that it's an indication that maybe the new wiring was not grounded to the same point as the original wiring. And that could be the reason why you now have a ground loop, that whatever your outlet you're plugging your PC into is on the new wiring, or maybe the old wiring, and your home
Right.
theater gear is plugged into the opposite. And that's why there's a difference in ground loop potential. Again, that's some deduction going on, but all the pieces are there. Because I was like, why? You shouldn't get ground loops in modern construction, but we don't know how old his house is. And if there was
Right.
an add-on done, it could certainly be the case that the addition was grounded separately from the original wiring of your house, and that's how this ended up happening. So, the simplest solution is if there is a way to plug everything, including your PC, into the same, you could even do the very same outlet if you do get a
Yeah.
big enough surge strip, but at least within the same panel where everything was grounded to the same spot, then that should get rid of the ground loop. But that can be the explanation and what can be done about it. And a power conditioner isn't going to do anything extra.
No, it's not. It does add. You could add battery.
You could add
backup,
battery backup, sure.
which would do something. But if you're expecting to get a power conditioner and suddenly everything sounds clear,
I mean,
it's not the way
I
things work.
suppose to be complete in our answer, there are the types of battery backups that you are always running off the battery. They are the full inline, constant active style of battery backup where you are never actually drawing the power directly from the wall outlet. It's just constantly charging the battery and you're always running off the battery forever and ever. Those are way more expensive. They're also exceedingly noisy because in order to have the type of battery that can supply that power on a continuous basis, it's not just a regular, lithium ion or even lead acid battery that's going on there. It's like a generator type battery. But
Right.
those do exist, but I don't think that's the sort of thing he was asking about. But for the sake of
Right.
completeness, I'll mention it does exist.
Earl, last week Rob mentioned there were 3 movies with soundtracks specifically mixed to make use of front wides. What are those 3 movies?
So
Rob?
they were the 3 that ever came out, DTS Neo X Blu-rays, which were Dread, The Expendables 2, and Step Up Revolution. And yes, I most definitely own all 3 of those Blu-rays because I got into Neo X when it came out, and those were the 3 and only 3 that were ever put into that format.
I own Dread. I will say that. I own Dread, and I enjoy Dread. I watch Dread on the regular.
Right.
I haven't, and oftentimes I'm sitting there, during the day thinking I should watch Dread tonight, and then I end up watching something else. But I don't say that about very many movies. I very much enjoy Dread.
And that is the Carl Urban version, not the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd. No, it's the newer Carl Urban Dredd. But yeah, DTS has moved on to DTS X. They aren't putting anything out in Neo X anymore, and they never will. So yeah, those were the 3.
So Earl already had dual SB16 Ultra subwoofers placed in diagonally opposite corners. He bought 2 more, so now he has 4 of them. But instead of putting 1 sub in each corner, he tried stacking the new subs on top of the existing subs. He already level matched the existing subs, so he set the new stacked subs to the exact same volume levels, and he did not rerun room correction. With things set up that way, he said he's getting a lot more slam and tons of tactile sensation. To his understanding, by doubling the subs, he should now have a 6 dB more subwoofer output, correct? But when he reruns room correction, will it still be 6 dB louder, or will it go back to sounding and feeling just like it did before? Is being only 6 dB louder really enough to change the bass sensation this much? The answer is yes to all the things you just said. So you stacked them.
Yeah.
So you basically if you had turned up the volume on your subwoofer dials or inside your receiver up by 6 dB, or depending on if they're in the corners, it might be as much as 9 dB up, you would have had, and I'm sure those, unless your room is massive, you probably could have done that without buying 2 more subwoofers and still had the headroom and still had the same impact. So yes, you could have achieved the same effect by just turning up the subwoofer dial. And if you rerun Odyssey, it will lower the subwoofer volume because you have stacked subs there, and it is now officially too loud.
Or it will first get you to turn down the volumes on the subs themselves so that it doesn't have to knock the trim level down by 6 dB. But yes, to explain to people how the adding up of more decibels as you add more subs, or how you position your subs, just because that's a worthwhile piece of information to have. So you'll see the measurements that are done, and they'll describe how that's done outside, with no walls around, no ceiling, and a ground plane measurement is how subs are typically measured these days. So as soon as you bring it into a room where you have a ceiling, if you say, stuck it sort of in the middle of your room, you would get from that subwoofer 3 decibels more output than the ground plane measurement. As you put that subwoofer next to a wall, you'll get another 3 decibels, so that's plus 6 at this point compared to the outside measurement. And if you put it into a corner where you've got wall, floor, and there's a ceiling to the room, you'd have another 3, so plus 9 compared to the measurement that was done outdoors. Now, if you put a second sub across the room from the first sub, you'll probably get another 3 decibels in the total output level. Whereas if you stacked the second sub on top of the first one, you'd get an additional 6 decibels. So his is a little bit confusing because he already had 2 subs that were across the room from each other. Then he got 2 more subs that got stacked on top of the first 2 subs. But you have to remember that that's the same as just doubling up what he already had. So it's plus 6 in his case. He's got that correct. But mathematically, that's what he should have, is plus 6. Now, Earl was saying this is what he did because if he does put the 4 subs in 4 different locations, that's a much more complicated setup procedure that you have to get. If your room is not a perfect rectangle, and Earl's very well might not be, well, you probably want to use the multi-sub optimizer software because there is no way to do it manually by trial and error. There's just no way you're ever going to nail that down. So you're going to want to use the multi-sub optimizer software, and Earl might be doing that. So he was saying, just to get a taste of what these can do, what he can do right away is stack them and just see what they do. So totally fine with that, and the 4 subs are not necessarily a waste. It wasn't just a matter where he could have turned the volume dials up or increased the trim levels. But yeah, if you reran Odyssey, even with the volumes where they are, it would have just turned your trim levels down 6 dB, and it would have sounded and felt the way it did before.
But if what you're going for is a more even response across your room, you are going to have to unstack these things and put them in different places. Because if the reason for buying extra subwoofers was to get more even response through all your seats, and then yes, you will have to put them in the 4 corners, and then like Rob says, it's a more complicated thing. But by stacking them, essentially you are just turning the volume up. I don't think that
pretty much. Yeah. And if you're wondering, is 6 dB enough? It doesn't seem like that big a number. That is 4 times the power. Every 3 decibels is twice as much power as what you had before. So 4 times the power for 6 dB more. Yeah, you can notice that.
More power, he says. I'm going to get 2 more and stack those 2. 8 times the power.
That's
right. Dean and his whole family are very happy with their new Samsung Q70 TV, Yamaha RX-V685 receiver, and Harmony Elite remote. But there is one lingering problem. For their Roku Ultra and Xbox One, everything is working perfectly. But for his cable box, he is not getting audio. That is a problem. His particular cable company only offers this Evolution brand box, so you can't swap it out for a different model. Its only output is HDMI port, and you can't use optical or digital coax or even analog RCA. It says it decodes MPEG-2 and MPEG-4, but its highest resolution output is 1080i or 720p, and its HDCP version is all the way back at 1.2. If he plugs the cable box directly into his TV, audio does come out of the TV's built-in speakers. But he was hoping to keep all of his sources in one location, all plugged into the Yamaha. He tried different HDMI cables and swapping for his other identical cable box from a different room, but the same results. Pictures make it through the Yamaha just fine, but no audio. He tried every setting he could think of that made sense, but nothing fixed this issue. Can we help?
And I made sure to put in quotes "that made sense" because I obviously can't blame anyone for trying different audio settings, but when it comes to HDMI, there very well could be settings that make no logical sense that could end up having an impact.
Yeah, so without me looking at the menu, which is what Rob clearly has done based on the notes he's got here, I would have no idea. But I will tell you, I would like to compliment all the cable box manufacturers out there for continuing the legacy tradition of Denon and all the other receiver manufacturers of having completely incomprehensible menus. And putting things in the same order that you would get them in if you took them, put them on Scrabble tiles, threw them up in the air, and let them land on the ground, and just kind of said, "Okay, that's the order we're going in." So thank you to all the cable box manufacturers for reminding us of times long past, so that we can all be nostalgic for the time when Denon's menus were nothing but text and would not come up on the screen at all, and you could find video settings in any possible menu.
Which, by the way, is much improved today. So that is how things used to be.
I said it was legacy.
That's right. But yeah, so I mean, I want to start with what is the simplest and pretty much surefire way of at least getting this functioning, which is to sadly forego the vision you had in mind of having all your sources together and everything plugged into the receiver first, which I don't blame you. That's how I'd want to do things too. But since you know that audio is coming out of that cable box, if you plug it directly into your TV, you do have the option of doing exactly that. You plug the cable box into the TV and then actually not even using ARC, because if this is still somehow some kind of weird HDMI problem and even ARC doesn't work, there is an optical audio output on the back of your Samsung, and there is definitely a way to have the cable box plugged into the Samsung TV and then use the Samsung's optical audio connection to feed that audio back to your AV receiver. So that is pretty much the surefire way of getting this to work. If nothing else, I suggest works. But I'm going to say that if you go in, because I mean, he's like, there are no audio settings for this cable box because there is only one HDMI port. There's nothing else to be configured. That's where the signal has to come out of. So the Yamaha is the new thing here. And there are some things that might be worth trying. So you would go into the setup menu of the Yamaha. You would actually go to the video/HDMI section, so nothing to do with audio, explicitly, but that's where you would go. And just to test if this actually is an HDCP problem, because the Yamaha is set up to detect the HDCP version automatically, but just in case, if you go into the video/HDMI settings, you can manually change the HDCP version. There are only two choices, auto or 1.4. So try setting it to 1.4. The trick there being, if you already did that, you do have to cycle the power on the Yamaha for that change to take place. Kind of like making a settings change in a PC. Sometimes requires a reboot. So if you were just toggling it and not hearing a difference, that could be the reason, is that you need to do the power cycle, so worth a shot. The other one is sometimes the video processing has an influence on this. Again, you wouldn't logically think it would, but it sometimes can. This is again going to be in the video/HDMI settings, in the video mode, where you would think that setting it to direct, where the Yamaha does no video processing, would be the surefire way to make this work. But occasionally, having the receiver do the processing so that the cable box is essentially not having to deal with the television on the other end, detecting the television on the other end. It's just detecting the Yamaha as the video device instead. That can sometimes work in situations like this. So try changing the processing to on and setting the resolution to 4K so that the Yamaha is upscaling everything. Now, if none of that does anything, the Yamaha has a weird advanced setup menu where you can only access it by physically holding down on the like receiver itself, not the remote buttons, the front panel. You hold with the Yamaha in standby. You hold the straight button, the button labeled straight on the front panel, and then power it on, and that will give you access to the advanced setup menu. Now, there's a thing the Yamaha does called monitor check, which is checking the EDID information from your Samsung to see what resolutions it accepts. You could try setting that to skip instead of yes to see if that will prevent your cable box from detecting things downstream. And finally, you can change the 4K mode to mode 2, which limits things to 10.2 gigabits per second. If none of those make a difference, then just plug your cable box into the Samsung and use an optical connection.
I zoned out there.
Of course you did. That was ridiculous. But yeah, he said he tried all the settings that made sense. I'm like, yeah, it's HDMI. Settings that don't make any sense could still be a problem.
Right. All right, Jeremy. He's in France, and he's and a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club. What is that? Did I make that up?
No, Lee and I joked about that. We were like, is anybody listening to this last question? It's beyond the 2 hour mark. So Jeremy's like, yeah, I'm here. I listen to whatever is there.
So as a reminder, Jeremy has been fine-tuning his open living room home theater plans ever since his starting point, which was a proposal put together by the Eclipse Design Service in France. I do remember this. Mm-hmm. It is, yes, I do remember this. Tom warned him many times that he should audition to speakers in person to make sure they are to his liking. With everything that's been going on in the world, that took a while to accomplish, but Jeremy has done so now, and he confirmed that he likes the way the Eclipse reference Premiere Pro in-wall speakers sound, at least in the showroom, and he has found a young contractor whom he likes, so he's hoping to finalize some more decisions. One thing that has already changed is that some of the framing is being altered to allow for sufficient depth for the in-wall speakers in load-bearing and exterior walls.
That's good.
That's good.
That is a very good thing to have got.
Not something you're going to find out later. That's for sure. So now that he's been to a showroom and had a taste of the experience at a similar seating distance to what he'll have in his home, he's strongly considering the addition of a motorized screen that can come down in front of his flat panel for movies at night. His contractor suggested a Lumine.
I mean, it's in France, so I've probably Lumen, but
Lumen,
probably
say it like that. Lumen. Show place 120-inch screen for €1,700. How much are euros to dollar? They're not 1-to-1, right? Isn't
Euro should be worth more than American dollars, but sometimes when it comes to electronics, they're basically 1-to-1.
Okay.
But
€1,700 is a lot.
It won't be less than $1,700. It would either be $1,700 or more converted to US dollars.
So this is a recessed in-ceiling housing, so the screen is as close to invisible as possible when it is rolled up, but it's a basic white, non-acoustically transparent, non-tensioned screen. Well, I was okay with the first two. I am less okay with the last one. The idea seemed to be to mount it high enough that it wouldn't block the in-wall center speaker, which will go below the flat panel, but Jeremy isn't sure if it will be comfortable with the screen that high. Whatever. Does have an acoustically transparent and tensions in-ceiling model, but it will cost €4,000. What do we think are their other options? Well, I think it's got to be cheaper to import one from the United States. To be honest with you,
you don't even have to do that. I looked it up, and Elite Screens has an outlet in France. It's not even that you'd have to import it from another part of Europe. Elite Screens is in France directly. So yeah, I would definitely consider Elite Screens here. They do have a very similar, if that's the type of casing you want, where you don't want to see the casing of the screen at all. They do have that, and they call it their Evidence B series, is the completely recessed housing. And they do have options for acoustically transparent. I would highly recommend, if you do, it is called Acoustic Pro UHD. That is if you want to go acoustically transparent, that is the only fabric out of Elite's lineup that I would recommend. It's not my absolute favorite acoustically transparent fabric in the entire world, but it is still pretty darn good, and I really have no problem with it, and the cost is certainly lower than this. So yeah, the question of acoustically transparent or not, what you really want to look at is you already know the seats that you have, so you already know your approximate head height. Do consider if, I don't know if his seats recline at all or if he sort of leans back at all, but consider your resting eye line, because your resting eye line isn't necessarily level with the ground. It might be at a little upward angle. That's pretty common. But consider your resting eye line wherever that lands on your front wall. And what you would basically want is for that to be 1/3 of the screen's height from the bottom of the screen. So like 2/3 of the screen's height would be above wherever your resting eye line hits on your front wall. That's about as high as I would want to put a screen. I wouldn't want to put it much, much higher than that. So that can kind of tell you whether that would give you enough space to have the center speaker physically below it, or if the center speaker is going to end up behind the screen when it's rolled down that far.
So, I mean, what he's saying then is that his TV will be wall mounted, and the center speaker will be in the wall, below the TV.
Yeah.
I mean, I would absolutely place that speaker so that I could not have to buy an acoustically transparent screen, because I don't think that. I mean, remember M&K, one of the premier, at the very beginning of home theater speaker manufacturers. I mean, they aren't anymore, but all their speakers were meant to go on the ground
and angled up,
and angled up a little bit.
Sure.
So your mind will naturally put the sounds where they need to go, no matter how high or low they are in comparison to the screen. I mean, it's amazing how your brain can do that, because your eyes just tell you where things are supposed to be coming from, so your brain makes it happen.
And on top of that, his room is not completely light controlled. He actually has large windows that'll be directly opposite the screen. So even if you have curtains or shades that go over those windows, this is probably not going to be a great setup to use in the daytime. He's like, no, this is for movies at night, and that's fine. It'll probably work quite well in that scenario. But it's a reason why an acoustically transparent screen is always going to have lower gain than just a regular solid screen, and you don't have 100% light control no matter what, even at night. So yeah, I agree with Tom fully. If you can plan it out so that, the bottom edge of your motorized screen is going to come down to where it comes, and then the in-wall center speaker is just below that, that would be the better way to do this.
Yeah, 100%. His contractor proposed the Optima UHD65 for the choice of projector. He hasn't heard us mention that model. What are our thoughts? Our thoughts are usually JVC or Epson, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
Right. So
and
one of those.
So I mean, first of all, the UHD65 from Optima is a nice projector. If somebody already owns that one, I'm not like, ooh, you made a bad choice. No, it's a nice projector. It is the larger DLP panel that is half 4K resolution, and then they wobble it twice per frame so that you get full 4K resolution. So it's not the 1080p chip that they wobble 4 times per frame. It's the larger one that they wobble twice per frame and gives you full 4K resolution. But its price point is basically identical to Epson's 5050 UB.
And that's the one we usually recommend.
That's the one.
The 5050.
Yeah, that's the one we typically recommend. Now, the 5050 UB has several advantages. It's brighter. It's got better black levels. It's got higher contrast. It has fully motorized lens controls. It has both vertical and horizontal lens shift. The Optima only has vertical, and it's a pretty small amount. And I think maybe beyond all of those things is the Epson has a better lens. It is a full glass lens. So even though the Epson is a 1080p panel that is wobbled twice per frame, so it's not even true full 4K resolution, every comparison review between the Epson 5050 UB and the Optima UHD65 says the Epson actually looks sharper to your eye, mainly because the lens is better. So I'm still going to say go for a 50/50 from Epson. It is definitely available in France and at basically the same price. If you got the Optima, it's not like you got a terrible projector. Please don't think that. We're talking about degrees here, but I would still go for the Epson.
For an Ultra HD Blu-ray player, the Sony X1100 ES was suggested. Jeremy's own brother keeps telling him to get a Panasonic. What would we recommend? Well, I mean, usually we recommend the
Yeah.
Panasonics, and there's the one over in Europe that we can't get here that's supposed to be the one that we really like, right?
Well, yeah, the
400.
450 actually wouldn't be what I would get for a projector. The
Ah.
450 would be great for an OLED because
Because of the
Dolby Vision and HDR10 plus, but the 450 doesn't have the HDR optimizer. And for a projector, I want Panasonic's HDR optimizer. I would tell you to get a UB420. Which you can still get over there because the 420 does not have Dolby Vision, but for a projector, we're not worried about that. We want the HDR optimizer, and the 420 has that. The Sony X1100ES is a pretty expensive player. I mean, I can see why an installer would want to recommend it to you. They're making a lot more profit on it, but it's by no means necessary. If you wanted to spend the same amount of money and actually get a potentially genuinely useful feature, I'd flop over to Panasonic's UB9000, their flagship Ultra HD Blu-ray player that costs about the same as the Sony X1100ES, but gives you the most HDR optimizer settings, including the lowest nit level, which could be beneficial for a projector. The UB820 and 420, the lowest they go down to is 500 nits. They tone map everything down to 500 nits. The UB9000 actually gives you two options below that. You can get all the way down to, I think 300 nits is the lowest that it goes. So if you want to spend that much money, I'd go Panasonic UB9000, but my honest recommendation is the 420. Save a pile of money.
We initially said we'd have no problem with him getting clipped subwoofers, and that for a room his size, a pair of their 15-inch models positioned as end tables would not be out of place. Jeremy decided that just wasn't the physical size and look he wanted to go for. So he's keen to go with SVS for subs, but the pricing is such that a pair of SB2000 Pro is what he had in mind. His contractor has now said that a pair of SB1000s would be fine. What are our thoughts? Our thoughts are that your contractor is very strange, because this room is fairly massive, and there is no the 2000s aren't going to pressurize it. For sure, I don't think. I mean, unless I'm reading this wrong.
SB2000 Pros, they're not going to like fully pressurize down at 20 hertz, but
the 1000s are definitely SB1000s. Man, that guy's lost his mind. This is a person who doesn't understand bass at all. I don't. And it's clearly when you're saying you want to spend more money, he must not be getting any commission from SVS or something, and that's why he doesn't care. Just wants to get you the cheapest, smallest thing.
I
don't know.
I would certainly take the amount you'll save on the Sony Ultra HD Blu-ray player flagship by getting the Panasonic 420 for like €1,500 less. I would certainly take that money and put it towards the subwoofers you had in mind of the SB2000 Pro. I mean, like we've been saying, we would get you even larger, higher output subs, but we completely understand that, yes, there is a physical size that comes along with that you don't want to deal with. We have no beef with that whatsoever. And all things considered, the SB2000 Pro is a very nice compromise, a pair of them. That is the way to go. Don't do SB1000s in this room size.
No. Timothy built himself some DIY towers using the concentric drivers from a pair of KEF LS50 speakers plus an SB Acoustics Satori 9.5-inch bass driver in each tower. The concentric driver is at the very top. There's a driver at the bottom, just above a front-facing port.
And big cabinets.
Big cabinets, yes. The concentric driver looks very small. I was like, I thought it was just a tweeter at first, and then he said it was concentric driver. I'm like, oh, that's a big box. And it's
not even technically like a mid-range, because the LS50 just has the two drivers. So this is a mid-woofer that is concentric with the tweeter. Yeah.
He has some detail painting left to finish, but he wanted to get them hooked up for a listen as quickly as possible. So, all right, here he goes. Timothy had written to us before about his wide-open basement room, which is open to the upstairs too via the stairway. He had asked whether pairing an SVS PB16 Ultra with his existing PC13 Ultra would be of any benefit, or if the extra headroom would just go to waste. When he measured his new speakers, he discovered that he must have lucked out in their terms of placement. All by themselves, they played nearly as low as his PC13 Ultra, which is positioned behind his couch, and actually have slightly flatter frequency response graph prior to EQ. He found the -6 dB point. The new towers to be 17.5 hertz in his main seat, while his PC13 Ultras was -6 at 16.5 hertz. All below where you can hear anyways, but let's go on. So considering all of that, does he have a situation where he should actually set his front towers to large, or should he still set them to small with an 80 hertz crossover? I 100% I 100% believe that no matter what we say, he's going to set these things so large. So there's no force on earth that's going to cause this man not to set them to large. So, sir, go with God.
But
set them to large, sell your subwoofer, and be pleased with your purchase.
But the issue is raw output. That's the issue. I have no doubt. This can absolutely be the case. When you're measuring in one location, you can absolutely sometimes luck out where the sound from your front, left, and right speakers is ridiculously linear. Sometimes it happens. Great. Wonderful. There's very little for your EQ to do at that point. But you're measuring a test sweep, which is playing at 75 decibels, and he was considering getting an even bigger sub than a PC13 Ultra because his space is completely wide open to 2 floors and the entire basement.
Right.
So the issue isn't the extension of these speakers. The extension seems perfectly fine. It's not the linearity, at least at 75 or perhaps even 85 decibels. But once you start trying to get to full reference volume, which sounds like something he's interested in since he was asking about a PP16 Ultra, these speakers very likely aren't going to be able to give you the raw output that you seem to be looking for. Now, so I would tell you to still set them to small, to still offload the bass response to a pair of subwoofers, ideally. The crossover point doesn't necessarily have to be 80 hertz. You can do some trial and error experimentation with some bass sweeps because you might find that the best blend you get happens at 60 hertz or 70 hertz, or maybe it's actually going to be higher than 80 hertz. Sometimes even with very capable speakers, the best blend happens at 90 hertz or 100 hertz. So it's some trial and error to do that. But yeah, my concern here isn't the linearity extension. That's great. Wonderful. You lucked out. Fantastic. It gives you more options to play with, really, is what it does.
Right.
But I'm worried about the output. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I just don't see you getting to 120 dB with these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, if you're going for full reference volume in the bass, is where you're going to need to be, and that's just not going to happen here. Especially with DIY speakers, and I'm saying this from a place of love. I mean, you just don't have the type of protections on these things that, and I don't know that many towers do. Would be okay with playing 120 dB, depending on how close you are. But even then, in the bass, you're trying to pressurize the entire space, and that's not going to happen.
It's the amplification side of it, too. I mean, it might be that your speakers actually don't tap out, but your amplifier ends up clipping, and that can be a whole huge problem, whereas the subs have their gigantic, dedicated, DSP-protected amplifiers built into them. So, yeah, that's the reason.
All right, Don. Don says, thanks for discussing his RV system upgrade last week. We mentioned several times how we couldn't figure out where his speakers were hidden. So he has provided an updated image. So there's a speaker underneath his TV, which we did see. There's a speaker in a cabinet that's above, that's like near the ceiling on the right, and a speaker below the dishwasher, I think, on the left.
That might actually be the electric range over there from the dials, but
that could be it too. Yes, that could be it too. Okay, electric range, below the electric range, near the floor.
Very near the floor.
That's his front. So his front left speaker is on the floor. His front right speaker is on the ceiling, and his center channel is underneath his TV. Yeah. How could we have missed it?
Wasn't where my eyes were first going. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, his front left speaker is nearly on the floor below his kitchen counter, and his front right speaker is close to the ceiling in the upper cabinet, and they're almost facing each other instead of being aimed at the seats. Horrible locations, in his own words. Yeah, that's the way I would describe them, too. Also, the little cube on the right is not a surround speaker. Surround speakers are above and behind the camera in this photo, also inside the cabinets. Inside cabinets with speaker grill cloth hiding them, but those locations are quite reasonable for surrounds. So with that updated information, does that change our speaker upgrade recommendations? Should he still consider the NHT Super Zeros or SVS Prime satellites, as I suggested, or should he go with a nice sound bar or passive speaker bar, as Rob said? Go with Rob's suggestion. Oh my God. Go with Rob's suggestion, like right now. Never listen to me again. Just ignore the sound of my voice from before this time. Please go with Rob's suggestion. Oh my Lord.
I am definitely looking at this and going, yeah, if you get, like I suggested, Kef's passive speaker bar, which physically will fit below his current television placement and give you 3 individual passive channels. Now, wiring so that your front, left, and right speaker wires end up where your current center speaker wire is. I'm not sure how difficult that is in your RV, but I would certainly go for that if you're going to go passive. Otherwise, yeah, a sound bar. I mean, I honestly kind of think a sound bar upgrade in here makes the most sense, because then you have the wireless subwoofer. You don't have to deal with a passive sub anymore. You got wireless surround speakers, so you're not worried about the wire connection to those either. I'm like, you can get a nice 5.1 with wireless surrounds and wireless sub. That's I'm pretty strongly leaning towards that. Now you'll get better left-right imaging than what you have now.
Right now, he's got a caucus head to the down to the left at about a 45-degree angle, so that the speakers are, our speakers are going between his ears. If not, then one's too high, one's too low. So if he just looks at everything to the left. That dude, I mean, I clearly I am poking fun at the speaker locations, but believe me, I'm not poking fun at you. This is the way that these things are set up sometimes, and they clearly, like, where can we put stuff, and that's what they did.
This is an RV. This isn't a room being built from the ground up, so you got what space you have. But I speaker bar.
I would 100% agree with Rob. I would go with the speaker, the bar. Yes, Nick. For his family room setup, Nick was using an old rear projection TV and a surround sound system driven by an Onkyo TXSR805 receiver. It's a 5.1 configuration. It's going to stay that way. The old TV finally died. Thank God. Rear projection was like, I so wanted to like them, and I so just didn't.
It's summer, and I had a hairdryer blowing on its bulb, and somehow it died.
Weird. I had it doing full white screens for 17,000 hours. And it died. Who would have known? The old TV finally died, so Nick replaced it with a TCL 8 series. His wife and kids like the simplicity of the Roku interface, and since his Onkyo doesn't have audio return channel or any 4K HDR compatibility, he plugged an Ultra HD Blu-ray player directly into the TV, and then he's using an optical audio connection to send the audio for discs and the TV's built-in Roku apps back to the receiver. That's all working fine, and simplifies things for his family, since the only things they have to do with the receivers turn it on and adjust the volume, no switching inputs. They just have to control what they want to watch on the Roku TV. But Nick has gotten into some retro gaming in a big way. He has 5 different mini consoles plus a Switch, and he's thinking he'll likely get a PS5. For his taste in games, he doesn't have much interest in the Xbox Series X. But then we get to say XX.
I know.
A lot. And I want to Bone X, XX, whatever. His Onkyo only has 3 HDMI 1.3B inputs. I completely forgot there was a B. The TCL has 4 HDMI 2.0 inputs, so he's already 1 input short. And if he gets a PS5, he'll be 2 inputs short and no room for expansion. He doesn't want to spend a lot on the new receiver, though, and it doesn't seem like entry-level models have as many HDMI inputs as he would like. Plus, there are all the PS5 HDMI 2.1 capabilities considered. His TCL 8 series doesn't support variables or refresh rate or eARC at the moment, but supposedly they are working on adding those via firmware update. Everybody hold your breath. Didn't happen yet? Nope. Okay, keep holding. One other feature he would like is the ability to change what is displayed on the front panel so that he can easily see which game system is currently active. So how should he come at this? Should he just get an HDMI switch? Should he get the least expensive receiver model that has the most HDMI inputs? Or does he need to consider one of the newest Denon models in order to support VRR for the PS5? Variable refresh rate was VRR stands for. So how many things? He has 5 different mini consoles plus a Switch. So that's 6. Yeah. Plus the PS5.
Potentially. So that's 7 games. And then he also has an Ultra HD Blu-ray player. So that's 8 HDMI devices immediately, and who knows if he might add 1 or 2 more coming up.
So I'm going to make a sort of probably you don't want to hear it suggestion. and that is the 5 different mini gaming consoles or retro gaming consoles you have. I would suggest getting a Retro Pi
Oh,
with use the emulator. That's what I would
consolidate it all down.
Consolidate it all down into one basically it's a Raspberry Pi with an emulator built into it, essentially, and you can load a bunch of games onto it, all the games that you had plus thousands that you didn't want to have. And to me, that goes from those 5 to one HDMI input for all of those things, and then you just select what emulator you want to use. Then you've got one for that, one for your Switch, one for your Ultra HD Blu-ray player, so that you're down to 3. And then you can get whatever receiver you want. Your PS5 gives you the 4, and if you got another thing, 5 is very common on anything. So it's only going to be 5.1. You're saying system. Yeah. So at that point you're limited only by what other features you want, and that is if you want better Odyssey, if you want specific pass-through features or something like some of the new Denons have, or turning off everything. If you really wanted that, you could do it that way. But any receiver these days will pass through the 4K and everything else, and then Bob's your uncle. That's my suggestion.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna take the question as wrote, but also assume that maybe the thing he really, really wants most is the official controller pads, because with a Retro Pi, you wouldn't have the official controller pads for each of the retro systems. So there could be the justification there, although I by no means disagree with what Tom suggested there. If what you really like most is the retro games, then yeah, there's certainly that way of consolidating it all down to one little Retro Pi console. But let's put that aside. I'm going to work a bit backwards because let's say he was thinking, do I need one of like the newest Denon or Marantz models that has the one HDMI 2.1 input that the PlayStation 5 could plug into? And I'm going to say you don't need that because let's say you are waiting on that TCL 8 series update for a while yet, right? Right now, it doesn't have variable refresh rate. It doesn't have eARC. So if it doesn't have variable refresh rate, then it doesn't matter if you plug the PlayStation 5 into a last year, a 2019 AV receiver, and send through 4K at 60 hertz with HDR. That's totally fine, because at the moment, your TV doesn't have VRR anyway. If the update does come and the TV does get VRR and eARC, well, then you can plug the PlayStation 5 directly into the television. That'll give you your VRR that way, and you could use eARC to send full lossless 5.1 audio back to your AV receiver. So again, a 2019 AV receiver that has eARC will support that. So either scenario, you don't need the receiver to pass through the VRR signal. So you don't, right. In that sense, you don't need a 2020 Denon. I'm
still unconvinced that VRR is really necessary.
Yeah, and at most, your TCL is going to go up to 60 hertz because there are ways to have variable refresh rate and eARC on 18 gigabit per second HDMI inputs, and that is what your TCL has. What you can't do is magically turn your 18 gigabit per second HDMI inputs into 40 or 48 gigabit per second inputs. That would be a full hardware board upgrade. That isn't happening. So you're not going to go up to 4K 120 with your TCL 8 series. The max you could go up to is 60. But if you do want the variable refresh rate, which will vary between 48 and 60 frames per second, which isn't a huge range, but it'll match what the console is doing, then those are the two scenarios. So either way, you don't need a 2020 Denon. Now, you can make an argument for getting a 2019 Denon because what you don't have right now is lossless audio. Right now, you're limited if you're doing 5.1 to vanilla Dolby Digital. That's what the TCL can send out of its optical connection. That's what you have to use right now because your current receiver doesn't even have the regular version of ARC, let alone eARC. So you can make an argument for getting a new receiver because that'll at least let you have lossless audio. You could plug your Ultra HD Blu-ray player directly into your new receiver, or if what you want to do is plug all of your retro consoles into the receiver, because you're the one who changes those inputs, you could leave the Ultra HD Blu-ray player connected to the television. Hopefully eARC does arrive, and that would let you send lossless audio through the television back to a 2019 receiver. And same for the PlayStation 5. So what I really think you need is a 2019 receiver. If you want the minimum, it would be one that has 6 HDMI inputs, because that would let you connect all your video game systems to the receiver. The lossless audio can come through the television via eARC. And then you would get lossless audio and the ability to change the name of the inputs on the front of the AV receiver.
Right.
So the Denon S750H, it's like the second to least expensive model that they had, has 6 HDMI 2.0 inputs. One of them is on the front panel, so that might look a little bit janky, but it might be actually a good place to plug in the switch, because the switch you kind of disconnect sometimes anyway. If you want to have 8 HDMI inputs, one of which is on the front, then you go to the S950, which you can find for about just a little over $400 right now. So I would probably do that. I mean, you could just get a Switch, but like an HDMI Switch I'm talking about, not a Nintendo Switch. You could just do that, but then you'd never get lossless audio. You'd have no upgrade, and you'd never see the name of what console is playing on the front panel. So I think one of the lower end, the S-Series Denons from 2019 is the way to go here.
All right. While the speaker system will remain 5.1, he really would like to upgrade the speakers themselves. At the moment, he has some dinky, his words, Yamo satellites and a bass module, but he already has plans for a big subwoofer upgrade in his dedicated theater, at which point he'll move the Outlaw LFM1 to the living room. He already loves his Ascend Sierra 2 speakers in his theater, so he figures he likely can't go wrong with Ascend SE series speakers for the living room. He's pretty set on using the HTM200 SEs for surrounds, but isn't quite sure what his front 3 speakers should be. He can't help but feel it'd be nice to have the larger size and extra output capabilities of the CMT340 SE, but then again, they never crank things up in this room, and while his wife is okay with the bigger speakers, even Nick has to admit the 340 center might be a bit big, and a lower price would be a good thing, so what do we think he should get? So he wants to stick with Ascend.
Yeah,
is what he's
which
basically
I
saying.
certainly have no problem with. I
Of course
don't
you
think
don't.
you'll be disappointed at all.
Well, I mean, does he have to have a massive center and big massive speakers up front to do this? No. I mean, how big are the 200 SEs? I don't remember the lineup.
So the 200 SEs are the sealed design with the dual 4-inch drivers, and the tweeter that's kind of offset. It almost looks like one of those Vance Dickinson designs with the offset tweeter and the two 4-inch woofers in a sealed cabinet. It's about 6 inches deep, and then it's about a foot tall and 7 inches wide or so, like that. That's the issue.
Go all the way around with those things. I mean, why do you? I would just, if you want to have those, just do it all the way around. That's what
going by his diagram, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I don't know if it's fully to scale, but it doesn't look like you're sitting 20 feet away. If you've got a couch on the side wall and then about another couch width, it's 12 to 15 feet, I'm guessing, at the most. The HTM200 SEs can absolutely handle it. The HTM200 SEs get overlooked and underestimated simply because they're the smallest speaker in Ascend's lineup. But they are very capable little speakers. They are not slouches in any sense. So given that you're coming from satellites already, the HTM200s are going to be considerably bigger than your teeny tiny little satellites right now. But going all the way to the CMT340s, I don't know if your wife actually fully appreciates how physically large they really are, because they look nice and black and, kind of tall and slender in the picture, but those are some big honking speakers. You could, of course, go with the CBM 170s, which are the model that falls in between.
Right.
You could do that if you just, for whatever reason, you can't stand the idea of sealed HTM 200s as your front 3 speakers, but believe me, they are a completely adequate design for this room size and seating distance.
Seems to be, yeah. I'm looking at the room too. It does not look that massive.
And if, again, this diagram is an indication and your TV is wall mounted and you don't want the center speaker sticking way out by comparison, then having an HTM 200 as a center is a wonderful idea. So I would do that. And plus, it saves you money. Can't complain.
Yeah. Martin asks, what ceiling mount should Martin consider for an Epson 5030 UB? He doesn't want to cheap out. That's why I thought cheap. It's right below that. But he doesn't want to break the bank either. Normally I like to look at Chief, but they are expensive.
Yeah, they're a little pricey.
But they're usually, in the case with Chief, a lot of times, it really doesn't matter which one you get because they're all really good,
right.
But they're all pricey. So what do you got, Rob?
So I would do the alternative to Chief is Peerless, in my opinion. Peerless AV. They have, so one of the things I really, really like to go for, and you've got a nice projector, the Epson 5030 UB. When it came out, it was a wonderful flagship projector at the time, and it's still a very nice performer. So I think it's worth having a nice mount for this. So the Peerless PRG series, what I really like about them is they have the little worm gear for your your what is it? Your pitch and your roll. It gives you that adjustment there. I really love that because, we get the questions sometimes, right? They're like, I set up my projector, everything seems aligned, but like the left side of my screen, like the corner kind of goes up into the top and the right side doesn't do that. It's like, yeah, you got a little trapezoid because you need the super fine adjustment on, one of the things, one area of tilt in some direction. Having the little worm gears to do that is a wonderful, precise way to get that dialed right in. Now, over at Amazon, you can get a Peerless PRG ceiling mount for, $90.84. That's not outlandishly expensive. The retail price is $200 on that thing, so it's not super cheap if you're paying full retail. But Amazon's got it for under $100. So yeah, in his email he was like, can you give like 2 or 3 suggestions? I'm like, well, Chief at the top, that's the more expensive. This Peerless at under $100 if you get it from Amazon. And you can head over to Monoprice, get one of their.
I was gonna say.
Get one of their $25 ceiling mounts. It'll hold your projector just fine. And if you're willing to fiddle with the manual, screwing it in adjustments, you pretty much only have to do it once. But it can be frustrating if you really care about an ever so slightly trapezoid shape in one direction. Then that's what you're paying a little extra for.
Carl's theater area is about 12 by 15 by 8, but it's open to the kitchen at the rear left and the entryway and the entryway at the rear right and up the stairs at the back. So I don't know. It's open to everything.
A little bit.
He's got a black wall up front with can't tell which speakers those are.
They
but
are ELAC Adante, which is it's coming up text below the images, but those are real nice looking speakers. I gotta say they're classy looking. Yeah. I like those.
He's got black. It looks like black. A wall up front with some black foam behind the speakers. It looks like he's got white speaker wire running up the wall, maybe for his surrounds, is what I'm guessing.
What's for his prime elevations, his Atmos are up there.
Prime elevation.
And some white speaker going along the baseboard to get to his surrounds. Yeah.
Yes. All right. He has a 5.2.2 configuration with ELAC Adante speakers up front, SVS Ultra surrounds, SVS Prime elevation speakers up high on his side walls and slightly in front of his row of 3 recliners. Dual SVS SB13 Ultra subs both at the front of the room. So, would we say his room is too small for Atmos? Should he do away with the prime elevations? Do you hear them? Do they make sound? Do you feel like they are doing something for you? Because if not, then, this is a question you can answer yourself, honestly.
Your room's bigger than mine, and I've got 4 Atmos speakers, so yeah. I don't think that, just straight away your room is too small for them. No, I wouldn't say that. But whether or not you want to continue using them, I can certainly understand someone saying, I put them up there and I just don't care, and maybe you don't like the look or you didn't think they were worth it or whatever. I can get behind the argument either direction. I could simultaneously get behind the argument of adding 2 more if you really want to, but I don't know if his AV receiver supports that or if it tops out at 7 speakers.
Well, and then where is he going to put them too?
A little behind.
Front, up. Well.
I mean,
Yes.
one thing that
But a little behind the seats is like right above his his surround
it is.
speakers
Oh,
too.
yes,
So
very much so.
yeah.
One thing I would say, though, is that the way that he has these prime elevations mounted is so the prime elevations, to describe this for people who aren't seeing the images, they do have one dimension that is longer than the other. And what you could potentially do is turn them so that the longer dimension is along the ceiling and the shorter dimension is the one coming down your wall, and that will make it so that the tweeter is aiming closer to directly down. Because right now,
That's exactly how I have mine
right,
mounted. If they are mounted on the ceiling, like the one is right above, because my couch is against one wall,
mm-hmm.
and I have them mounted that way, and the other one is in the room a little bit, so that it is essentially the same distance from the edge of the
Mm-hmm.
couch, or very close to. So yes, I agree with what Rob's saying. You mount them on the ceiling with the so there's if you're on the ceiling with the longer of the two now side edges against the wall, with so that the tweeter, which is on the shorter one, is poking into the room, and then your tweeter will be facing more straight down
Yeah.
instead of sort of aiming just below your ceiling fan.
Yeah, because right now
Basically.
the tweeters are more or less firing across the room, across the ceiling. Now they're angled down a little bit because of the wedge shape of the prime elevation speakers, but I really wouldn't say those tweeters are firing down. They're firing mostly across the room above you and then angled down just a little bit. Whereas if you rotated the way that the speaker is oriented, then it's mostly firing down. And that might be enough of a change for you to say, hey, I notice them more. These are more worthwhile to me now. And it would give you the option of, if you did add two more mounted the same way, they would actually fit in the space where for the opening to his kitchen. He's got a support beam, it looks like, that's going across there. He does have the space, whereas if he mounted it the way he has it now, it would like just come down a little below that support beam, it looks like. So I can see probably why he mounted it this way. Yeah, so maybe give that a try. Change the orientation of the speakers before doing away with them.
So he used to have a single PB1000. He knows that objectively it can't be the case, but he could have sworn it did a better job pressurizing this open space versus his Tool SB13 Ultras. Is he just imagining that? So those of you who are not looking at the pictures, his two SB13 Ultras are just inside of his front left and right speakers, flanking the entertainment cabinet up front. So he asked, how can these two more powerful, if not physically larger speakers, subwoofers, in unison, how can they sound less impressive than the single PB1000, I think is what
Yes.
he said, or the ported box 1000 subwoofer? Well, first of all, his space is not uniform.
No, this is not an enclosed rectangle at all.
So we cannot just say, place them better and it will sound better. But what very well could be happening here is you have two subwoofers placed up front. They're not close enough to where I would say they were co-located, so you're getting some interference or some comb filters, or however you want to say it. As the subwoofer's signals are bouncing around the room, we know that we cannot predict what's happening at your seat. So why would one single sub, not as powerful, sound better or more impressive, in your own words, than two more powerful subs placed up front? Nulls would be the answer, or probably more likely, some frequencies at your seat with that single PB1000 were being boosted by the reflections around the room and were making you feel more bass, which can be scarily different than having a more even bass response within a room. And we've said this multiple times. If your room was enclosed and you had a single PB1000 speaker, and you said, at my seat, it rumbles me, I can feel this stuff, and blah, 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 it's great. And then we say, get a second one so you have more even response. You get a second one, you're like, it doesn't sound as loud. It doesn't sound as impressive as it did before. But as you listen, you'll find that the speaker, the bass performance, the bass experience is, first of all, uniform from seat to seat, and the bass is there when you need it or when it's supposed to be, and it's not there when it's not supposed to be. And what you were probably hearing with a single PB1000 is a boost in some frequencies that rumbled you, that sounded very impressive, but then other frequencies were completely missing, and you didn't notice them because they were missing.
Right.
Now with these, you have two subwoofers placed in. Maybe one is in the same place as your other one, but now you have a second one placed someplace else. They are interfering in different, having different responses and bouncing around the room differently. And now one is canceling the other one out. Maybe you're sitting more in a null than you were in a boosted area, and it's just not, it doesn't sound as impressive. But maybe it sounds more accurate, but more likely it just sounds different.
Yeah, it's it can be the case. So it could be one of two ways, which is that either having the two subwoofers in this non-enclosed, non-rectangle, both of them at the front of the room, is resulting in worse, like objectively worse frequency response. That's a possibility in this scenario. Or you actually went to all the trouble of like dialing in the phase of one of the subs, getting everything, as uniform and linear as you possibly can with your dual subwoofer setup. And then by comparison to the previous setup where you had one sub that was not linear and very likely had some humps in it, that now by comparison, linear uniform response doesn't sound as impressive. It could be either one. We don't know without measuring or hearing it for ourselves. But what you can do is play bass sweeps. Play bass sweeps through your system as is. You don't have to change your configuration to tell what is going on. And if you listen to that bass sweep, if you went through the full procedure of setting up your dual subs to get them as uniform and linear as you can, and you play that bass sweep and you're like, yeah, that sounds like it's the same volume level all the way through that bass sweep, but I remember how my PB1000 used to sound and feel, and this just isn't as impressive. Well, you can take solace in knowing that you are objectively hearing a more accurate representation of the signal. It's just your old one had some humps in there that if you're following accurately to the signal, they shouldn't have been there, but they were humps in the bass, so they were all impressive and thumpy. It could easily be that case. This is very common when we convince somebody to upgrade to dual subs, and the first question is, why does it sound quieter? How can two bigger subs than what I used to have possibly sound quieter than what I used to get with my single smaller sub? But that can absolutely be the case sometimes.
Yeah. Ken. So Ken really took Rob and Lee's advice to heart. His future home theater is now framed. There was a necessary soffit along the left wall for some duct work, so he had his framer add a matching soffit along the right wall. Even in its unfinished state, Ken thinks it looks good, so he thinks it was a great suggestion. Good job, guys.
Yay. Symmetry. Symmetry is almost always pleasing to the eye.
Yeah. Rob mentioned that those soffits could be helpful when it comes to soundproofing because he won't have to put big holes in the upper ceilings for recessed lighting. Puck lights were mentioned as an option. Could we recommend any specific product that fit this puck light description? Well, it looks like a hockey puck, which is what I mean. If you're wondering why Rob suggested a hockey puck, well, he is Canadian.
There is that. Yes. If for some reason now, I searched on like the American version of Amazon or the American version of Home Depot and just put in puck light, and yes, things come up. So this does exist as a name, but they are also known as like under cabinet lighting. This is the type of lights that would commonly get installed underneath your kitchen cabinets, but there's no reason why they can't be installed elsewhere. So these are small, typically. I mean, there are various sizes. Some of them are 5 or 6 inches in diameter, but typically they're like 2.5, 3 inches in diameter. They're that sort of size, and then they're only the actual light part of it is only 5/8 of an inch deep, from top to bottom. So these aren't like recessed can lights where you have to have a whole big opening. These are the type where like on your soffit, you could actually have it regularly drywalled and then just add a second layer of 5/8 inch drywall to the bottom and then cut the holes just in that second layer of drywall, and that is the depth of these little puck light type lights. And you can get them in low voltage, you can get them in battery operated, which you probably wouldn't want battery operated for a theater, but you get a low voltage version or a full 120 volt AC version. You can get ones where you can aim them or just have them stationary. And so if you get the full AC version, then you can typically have either 20 or 24 of them all connected to one circuit. The low voltage ones are usually limited to 6 or 12, depending on the wattage rating. So you can sort of go that way. But yeah, they're a wonderful way to add light all along the underside of those soffits along the side of your walls, because he's not going for a projector in this setup. That was on our advice. He's going for an 85-inch flat panel, which is going to look awesome because he's only sitting 8 feet. He's from the TV. He's only 7 feet away, 8 feet from the front wall. So that can have a nice sort of like bias lighting or ambient lighting effect because it's lighting up the sides of your room instead of full overhead floodlight type of thing. You can also with overhead soffits like you've got, get LED strip lighting. That actually kind of goes along the top and throws light across the upper section of the ceiling, and that can look really cool. And that could be like on a separate outlet from the puck light, so you have different zones of lighting control. You can turn them on independently of each other. So I think that's a good way to go.
So he took the suggestions to put his front seats 8 feet from the front wall, and then have a single riser at the back instead of a 2-level riser and 3 permanent rows of seats. There's Ken and his wife and their 5 kids. And they often have the neighbors' kids over, so that's why he initially wanted 3 rows. But he agrees that it makes more sense to have tall chairs or bar stools at the back. Okay, great. Okay, just so much scrolling. Here we go. All right. Hearing other AV Rant listeners' advice, he was going to have a TV stand anyway, so he won't put all the gear in a separate closet outside the room anymore. That means no long HDMI cable runs. And 9, Ascend HTM 200 SE speakers plus 4 Boston Acoustic Soundware 5.1 mounted on the inside edges of those soffits. Sounds like a plan. Okay, that's the same speakers we recommended for the last guy. How should he wire the 2 surround speakers on either side of his room? Home run separate pairs of speaker wires and make the series connection back at the AV receiver, or since the walls are open, just do the series wiring directly within the studs? I would do it back at the receiver.
Yeah. Gives you more options.
I think, later on, if you decided receivers became more powerful, they came out with more options, or you decided that one of these rows of seats wasn't whatever, you would have the option of turning it off. You would have the option of, connecting them differently. I would do it back at the receiver. Yeah.
So you're just going to have a regular speaker wire run to each speaker. All of those come back to the front of the room where your AV receiver is going to live now. And it's as simple as it's the red for the first speaker plugs into the red binding post of the receiver. The black for the second speaker plugs into the black binding post of the receiver, and then the remaining red and black that are left over, they just get connected together. But that can be back at the AV receiver. This type of length of speaker wire is not going to matter whatsoever, and that gives you more options if you upgrade to an external amplifier in the future, and you have an independent amplifier channel for each of the side surround speakers or something like that. Well, now the speaker wire is already there waiting, and you can plug it right in.
Right. Finally, what would we recommend for wall mounting the HTM 200 SE speakers? He knows he could just have small shelves, but he's a bit worried about kids running and knocking the speakers off. I mean, I'm going to be honest. Rob's going to give you a suggestion, but and it's fine to wall mount them. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I just always have I always flinch or cringe whenever somebody says, I'm worried about the kids knocking stuff over. I mean, I've had kids in my home theater since day one. I had a home theater before I had kids, and I've never, well, that's not true. For the most of the time, I've had speakers on stands in some way. And in this room, I've had speakers on shelves, and I have a projector and a projection screen, which people are like, I don't know about, kids they're going to do stuff. I've had very young children in here, and it's, I just give everybody the rules, sit down, don't get in front of the projector, don't throw anything at the screen, or you're out. And I've never had to kick anybody out of my home theater. It's never happened. But I have had to fuss at some kids for standing up and making shadow puppets. But those kids were my kids' friends, and they were a-holes, and I never had to see them again after that because I told them they were banned. That kid doesn't get to come back. Why? Shadow puppets, really? He's out.
Won't happen in this setup with a flat panel, so that's not a consideration. Right. Also, with Ascend speakers, the chances are if a kid ran into one of those, it's the kid that's going to get damaged and not the speaker. Honestly,
and the shelf too, yeah.
With the way that Ascend builds their speakers, those are sturdy little bricks that are more liable to damage the floor and the wall than themselves if they were to fall off. I would certainly suggest you just have little shelves that are directly built onto the walls, and then some museum putty, some blue tack, is going to stick the speakers onto those very securely. Possible to maybe dislodge them if you hit them hard enough, but not knock them right off if you got some museum buddy holding them on. So that is my number one suggestion. But if you're just like, nope, I don't want little shelves, I want to wall mount these directly, the HTM 200s do not have a keyhole mount built into them. They have dual threaded inserts on the back. So they don't have the single threaded insert like some speakers do. They have dual. So there's a couple of suggestions now. If you want the absolute most flush mount design that works, Pinpoint Mounts does have their AM45 LCR flush mount. It's ridiculously overpriced. They're like $60 each, which makes no sense. You can make your own. Okay, you could go down to the hardware store, get some Z-clips, drill the holes yourself that fit the threaded inserts, and make them yourself for a couple of bucks. So it's the design that you would look at, but you could make it yourself for way less money. I have no idea why they're so expensive, because most things that Pinpoint make doesn't cost that much. But over at Monoprice, they've got some not too thick mounts that would actually work just fine. They're like $12 for a pair of them from Monoprice, so the price is much more reasonable. Now, you might look at this and go, oh, the sort of like threaded stem that comes out of the ball joint on these seems a little bit long. They do have an adapter that does the dual threaded for connecting, but you can just saw off the extra length if it's sticking out too much of the threaded stem of the ball joint, and that'll still screw into the adapter for the dual threaded mount. So yeah, the Monoprice ones if you really want to wall mount them, but I would just do the shelves.
All right. That's going to be it for tonight or today or whatever time it is that you're listening to this. Who we got left?
We just have one person left on the topic list this week, which is Matt G. So Matt, we will answer you next week.
All right. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Jeremy and Joe for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, along with our 124 patrons over at patreon.com. Thank you, Jeremy, Joe, and patrons.
For sure. Jeremy, Joe, thank you so much for those PayPal donations. Really appreciate it. Anyone else who wants to donate that way, come to the website, avrant.com, and on the right-hand side, we've got the link that says Support AVRant, and it'll take you to PayPal. And then over at patreon.com/AVRant Podcast, you can sign up for an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to, and thank you so much to our 124 patrons over there.
I want to thank Ken for talking us up to his uncle and to SBS, and our notes of gratitude from Ephraim, Michael, and Mark.
For sure, Ken. That's great. Wonderful that you talked your uncle into that superior subwoofer. Thanks for talking us up to SBS. And Ephraim, Michael, and Martin, thank you very much for those notes. We really do appreciate it. It's wonderful to hear. It helps encourage us. And thank you once again to everybody for continuing to listen and sending in your questions. We really, really enjoy it.
For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.